The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravenshallow Palace as 10-year-old Prince Alexander walked quietly through the grand corridors. Unlike other days when he would run and play, today felt different. The young prince had been watching and learning, observing the people who worked tirelessly to keep his family's home running smoothly. Prince Alexander was not like most children his age. While other royal children might demand attention or throw tantrums when things didn't go their way, he possessed an unusual gentleness that surprised even his own parents. His bright blue eyes seemed to notice everything around him, especially the staff members who often became invisible to the royal family. On this particular morning, the palace was bustling with activity. The annual Royal Heritage Festival was approaching, and preparations were in full swing. Servants hurried through the hallways carrying decorations, flowers, and supplies. The kitchen staff worked overtime, preparing special dishes, and the groundskeepers tended to every flower and tree to ensure the palace gardens looked perfect. As Prince Alexander made his way to the library for his morning lessons, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. Near the servants' quarters, he saw an elderly woman struggling with a heavy bucket of water. Her name was Margaret, and she had worked at the palace for over 40 years. She had started as a young girl, cleaning chambers and helping in the kitchen, and had dedicated her entire life to serving the royal family. Margaret's hands trembled as she tried to lift the bucket. Her back was bent with age, and her breathing was labored. Prince Alexander watched as she attempted to carry the water up a flight of stairs to clean the guest chambers on the second floor. Nobody else seemed to notice her struggle. The other servants were too busy with their own tasks, and the royal guard stood at attention, their eyes focused straight ahead as they had been trained. The young prince felt something stir in his heart. His tutors had taught him about duty, honor, and leadership. But watching Margaret struggle alone taught him something deeper about compassion and service. Without hesitation, he changed direction and walked toward the elderly woman. "Mrs. Margaret," he called softly, his voice gentle and respectful. The old woman looked up, startled. When she saw the prince approaching, she immediately tried to curtsy while still holding the heavy bucket, nearly losing her balance in the process. "Your Highness," she stammered, "I didn't see you there. Please, don't let me keep you from your important business." Prince Alexander smiled warmly. "Mrs. Margaret, that bucket looks very heavy. Would you allow me to help you?" Margaret's eyes widened in shock. A prince offering to help a servant? Such a thing was unheard of in the palace. "Oh no. Your Highness, I couldn't possibly ask you to do such a thing. This is my work, and you have your royal duties to attend to." But Prince Alexander had already reached for the bucket handle. "Mrs. Margaret, my royal duty is to serve the people of our kingdom, and that includes the wonderful people who take care of our family every day. Please, let me help." The sincerity in his voice touched Margaret's heart. She had seen many royal children grow up in the palace, but none had ever spoken to her with such genuine kindness. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she slowly released her grip on the bucket. "Thank you, Your Highness," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. As Prince Alexander lifted the bucket, several things happened simultaneously. The water was indeed heavy, and the young prince had to use both hands and concentrate carefully not to spill any. Margaret walked beside him, her weathered face glowing with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. But the most significant reaction came from the palace staff and guards who witnessed this unprecedented scene. A royal guard named Captain William, who had served the family for 15 years, watched in astonishment as the young prince carefully carried the bucket up the stairs. William had been trained to protect the royal family from any danger, but he had never considered that sometimes the greatest nobility came not from being served, but from serving others. Word of the prince's kind gesture began to spread quietly through the palace corridors. Kitchen maids whispered about it while preparing meals. Groundskeepers shared the story while tending to the gardens. Even the stern head butler, Mr. Time, Harrison, found himself moved by the account of the young prince's compassion. As Prince Alexander and Margaret reached the second floor, the prince carefully set down the bucket near the guest chambers. Margaret looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "Your Highness, in all my 40 years of service here, no one from the royal family has ever helped me with my work. You have shown me such kindness today." Prince Alexander looked puzzled. Mrs. Margaret, you've been taking care of my family and our home for 40 years? That means you've been serving since before I was born. Yes, Your Highness. I started working here when I was just 16 years old. The prince's expression grew thoughtful. Mrs. Margaret, you've dedicated your entire life to caring for us. You've cleaned our rooms, washed our clothes, and helped prepare our meals for 4 decades. How could I not help you when you needed it? Margaret was so moved by his words that she could barely speak. You have such a kind heart, Your Highness. Your parents should be very proud. As they spoke, Captain William had quietly followed them upstairs. He stood at a respectful distance, but close enough to hear their conversation. What he witnessed challenged everything he thought he knew about nobility and service. The young prince wasn't just helping with a task. He was showing genuine respect and gratitude for someone who had given her life to serving his family. Other staff members began to gather discreetly in nearby corridors, drawn by the unusual sight of their young prince engaging in such humble service. They watched as he continued to speak with Margaret, asking about her family, her years of service, and whether there was anything else she needed help with. The impact of this simple act of kindness rippled through the palace like a stone thrown into still water. For the first time, many of the staff members saw Prince Alexander not just as a royal child, but as a future leader who understood the value of every person in the kingdom. By afternoon, the story of Prince Alexander's kind gesture had reached every corner of Ravenshallow Palace. In the kitchen, Cook Martha found herself wiping away tears as she prepared the evening meal. She had worked alongside Margaret for 20 years and knew how hard the elderly woman worked despite her age. That sweet boy, Martha murmured to her assistant, Sarah. To think he would carry water for our Margaret. His heart is pure gold. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. My grandmother always said you can judge a person's true character by how they treat those who can do nothing for them. Prince Alexander passed that test with flying colors. However, not everyone in the palace was pleased with the news. Lord Chancellor Edmund, a stern man who had served the royal family for decades, frowned when he heard about the morning's events. He believed firmly in maintaining proper boundaries between royalty and servants. This is highly irregular, Lord Edmund told his assistant as they walked through the palace corridors. Princes should not be doing servants' work. It sets a dangerous precedent and undermines the natural order of things. But his disapproval was quickly overshadowed by something unexpected that happened later that day. Prince Alexander was walking through the palace gardens when he heard a commotion coming from the stables. Curious, he made his way toward the source of the noise and discovered a small crowd gathered around one of the horse stalls. Inside the stall lay Thunder, the palace's oldest horse. Thunder had served the royal family faithfully for 18 years, carrying Prince Alexander's father on countless rides and ceremonial occasions. Now, the magnificent black stallion was clearly unwell, lying on his side and breathing heavily. He's been like this since morning, said Thomas, the head groom, his voice heavy with sadness. The veterinarian says there's nothing more we can do. Thunder is old and tired. It may be time to put him out of his misery. Several guards and stable hands stood around the stall, their faces grim. Many of them had worked with Thunder for years and had grown attached to the noble animal. Prince Alexander approached the stall quietly and knelt down beside the horse. Thunder's eyes were dim, but when he saw the young prince, his ears perked up slightly. Hello, old friend, the prince whispered, gently stroking Thunder's neck. You've been such a good horse, haven't you? You've carried my father safely for so many years. The adults watched in amazement as Thunder seemed to respond to the prince's gentle touch. The horse's breathing became slightly more relaxed, and he nuzzled against the boy's hand. Thomas, Prince Alexander said softly, may I stay with Thunder for a while? I don't think he should be alone right now. Thomas looked uncertain. Your Highness, this isn't really appropriate. You have your lessons this afternoon. And besides, this is no place for a prince. But Prince Alexander was already settling down next to the horse, his small hand continuing to stroke Thunder's mane. My lessons can wait. Thunder has spent his whole life serving our family. The least I can do is keep him company when he needs it most. Captain William, who had been observing from a distance, stepped forward. "Your Highness, perhaps I should escort you back to the palace. Your parents will be expecting you." Prince Alexander looked up at the captain with those sincere blue eyes. "Captain William, if you were sick and scared, wouldn't you want someone to stay with you?" Thunder can't speak, but I think he understands that he's not alone. The captain found himself at a loss for words. Once again, this 10-year-old boy was teaching the adults around him about compassion and duty. William had spent years protecting the royal family from physical threats, but he had never considered that sometimes the most important protection was simply being present for someone in their time of need. Word of Prince Alexander's vigil with Thunder soon reached the palace. Lord Chancellor Edmund arrived at the stables, clearly agitated. "Your Highness," he said firmly, "this behavior is unacceptable. You are a prince of the realm, not a stable boy. You have responsibilities and lessons to attend to." Prince Alexander looked up at the Lord Chancellor but didn't move from his position beside Thunder. "Lord Edmund, my father always tells me that leadership means taking care of those who depend on us. Thunder has been part of our family for 18 years. How can I abandon him now?" "Animals are not family members," Lord Edmund replied sternly. "They are property, tools to serve the royal household. You must learn to maintain proper distance and perspective." The stable hands and guards bristled at these words. They had all worked closely with the palace animals and considered them much more than mere property. Thomas, the head groom, stepped forward respectfully but firmly. "With respect, Lord Edmund, Thunder saved His Majesty's life 3 years ago when that wild boar charged during the hunting expedition. This horse threw himself between the king and danger without hesitation. If that's not loyalty and love, I don't know what is." Captain William found himself nodding in agreement. He remembered that day well. Thunder had indeed risked his own life to protect the king, and the horse had been injured in the process. Prince Alexander continued to stroke Thunder's neck as he spoke. "Lord Edmund, I understand that you want to protect our family's dignity and traditions, but I think true nobility comes from showing kindness and loyalty to those who have shown it to us." As the afternoon wore on, more palace staff quietly gathered around the stable. They didn't interfere or make noise. They simply stood nearby, offering their silent support to both the dying horse and their young prince. Margaret arrived with a soft blanket, which she gently placed over Thunder's body to keep him warm. Cook Martha brought a thermos of hot tea for Prince Alexander. Even some of the royal guards, who were supposed to remain at their posts, found excuses to patrol near the stables. The scene was unprecedented in palace history. A prince keeping vigil with a dying horse, surrounded by servants and guards who had been moved to join him in this act of compassion. As evening approached, Thunder's breathing became more labored. Prince Alexander never left his side, speaking quietly to the horse about all the adventures they had shared, even though most of those memories belonged to his father. "Do you remember the day you carried father to my christening ceremony?" the prince whispered. "He told me you wore special decorations and walked so proudly. You've always been such a noble horse." Captain William watched this scene and felt something shift inside him. He had spent years learning military tactics, protocol, and security procedures, but this young prince was teaching him about a different kind of strength, the courage to show vulnerability, to care openly, and to stay present during difficult moments. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the stable windows, Thunder's eyes began to close peacefully. Prince Alexander continued his gentle stroking and soft words until the faithful horse took his final breath. The stable fell silent except for the quiet sound of several people wiping away tears. Prince Alexander sat for a few more moments with his hand on Thunder's still form, then slowly stood up. "Thank you, Thunder," he said simply. "Thank you for taking such good care of our family. Thank you. Thank you for taking such good care of our family." Thomas approached the young prince with tears in his eyes. "Your Highness, what you did today." Thunder knew he wasn't alone. "You gave him the greatest gift possible." Captain William stepped forward and, for the first time in his military career, felt compelled to kneel before his young prince. Not because protocol demanded it, but because he had witnessed something that commanded his deepest respect. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "you have shown us all what true leadership looks like. The next morning brought the official opening day of the Royal Heritage Festival. Visitors from neighboring kingdoms had arrived, along with dignitaries, nobles, and common folk who had traveled from far and wide to celebrate at Ravenshollow Palace. Prince Alexander woke early, as was his habit. But instead of heading straight to his morning lessons, he made his way to the servants' quarters. He had been thinking about Margaret and wanted to make sure she wasn't overworking herself during the busy festival preparations. What he found surprised him. Margaret was sitting in the small servants' common room, surrounded by several other elderly palace workers. They were sharing tea and quiet conversation, their faces more relaxed than he had seen in a long time. "Your Highness," Margaret exclaimed when she saw him, starting to rise from her chair. "Please, don't get up," Prince Alexander said gently, approaching the group. "I wanted to check on you before the festival begins. Yesterday was quite emotional for all of us." An elderly gardener named Robert spoke up. "Your Highness, what you did yesterday with Thunder, and helping Mrs. Margaret the day before, well, it's got us all talking. In all our years of service, we've never seen such kindness from someone so young." Margaret nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You've reminded us that our work has meaning and dignity, Your Highness. We don't just clean and serve. We're part of something bigger." Prince Alexander looked puzzled. "Of course your work has meaning. How could our palace function without you? How could our family live comfortably without your care?" His genuine confusion touched their hearts. The prince truly didn't understand why this would be remarkable because, to him, treating everyone with respect and kindness was simply natural. As the festival celebrations began, something extraordinary started to happen throughout the palace. The story of Prince Alexander's quiet acts of compassion had spread not just among the palace staff, but among the visiting dignitaries and nobles as well. During the opening ceremony, as the royal family made their grand entrance into the main ballroom, Prince Alexander noticed something different about the palace guards. Instead of their usual rigid, straight-ahead stare, many of them briefly made eye contact with him, their expressions showing a warmth and respect that went beyond mere duty. Captain William stood at attention near the main entrance, but when Prince Alexander passed by, the captain gave him an almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about how the prince had earned something far more valuable than obedience. He had earned genuine respect. The festival proceeded with its usual grandeur. There were elaborate dances, magnificent feasts, and formal presentations. Prince Alexander participated in all the required ceremonies, but his thoughts kept drifting to the palace staff who were working tirelessly behind the scenes to make everything perfect. During the afternoon break, while his parents were meeting with important guests, Prince Alexander slipped away to the kitchen. He wanted to thank Cook Martha and her team for their hard work during the festival. When he entered the kitchen, he found the staff working at a frantic pace. The heat was intense. Sweat dripped from their faces, and they moved with the efficiency of a well-trained army, preparing for battle. "Your Highness," Cook Martha gasped when she saw him, "you shouldn't be back here during service. It's too hot and chaotic for royalty." But Prince Alexander rolled up his sleeves. "Cook Martha, you're preparing food for hundreds of people. What can I do to help?" The entire kitchen fell silent. Even the sizzling of pans seemed to quiet as everyone stared at the young prince, who was offering to work in the hot, cramped kitchen during the biggest event of the year. "Your Highness," Martha said carefully, "this really isn't appropriate work for a prince." "Cook Martha," Prince Alexander replied with a smile, "my hands work just as well as anyone else's. Please, tell me how I can help." And so, for the next hour, the future king of the realm helped wash dishes, carry supplies, and even assisted in garnishing plates under Cook Martha's careful supervision. His presence energized the entire kitchen staff, and they worked with renewed enthusiasm and joy. Word of the prince working in the kitchen during the festival spread like wildfire. Lord Chancellor Edmund was beside himself with frustration, but when he tried to retrieve the prince, he was stopped by an unexpected sight. Captain William stood blocking the kitchen entrance, along with 2 other guards. "I'm sorry, Lord Edmund," Captain William said firmly, "but Prince Alexander is currently engaged in important royal duties. Royal duties? Lord Edmund sputtered. He's washing dishes like a common servant. Captain William's expression remained serious but respectful. With respect, sir. He's learning what it means to serve his people. I'd say that's the most important royal duty of all. The confrontation drew attention from other palace guards, and one by one, they began to position themselves near the kitchen entrance. Not to keep the prince in, but to protect his right to serve as he saw fit. It was an unprecedented moment in palace history. The royal guard, whose duty was to protect the royal family from threats, had instead chosen to protect the prince's ability to show kindness and service to others. Lord Edmund realized he was outnumbered, not by rebels or enemies, but by men whose respect for their young prince had grown beyond mere protocol into something deeper and more meaningful. When Prince Alexander finally emerged from the kitchen, his clothes slightly wrinkled and his face flushed from the heat, he found a group of guards waiting for him, but instead of escorting him back to the formal festivities, they simply stepped aside and bowed slightly as he passed. "Thank you," Prince Alexander said simply to Captain William. "No, Your Highness," the captain replied quietly. "Thank you." As evening fell and the festival's grand finale approached, the entire atmosphere of the palace had subtly shifted. The servants moved with more pride in their work. The guards stood taller, knowing they served not just a royal family, but a future king who understood the value of service. Even the visiting dignitaries commented on the unusual warmth and harmony they sensed throughout Ravenshallow Palace. During the closing ceremony, King Frederick stood to address the gathered crowd. He spoke of tradition, honor, and the importance of preserving the values that made their kingdom strong. "But perhaps," the king said, his eyes finding his young son in the crowd, "the most important lesson we can learn is that true nobility isn't about being served, but about serving others with humility and grace." The crowd applauded, but those who had witnessed Prince Alexander's quiet acts of compassion understood the deeper meaning behind the king's words. Later that night, after all the guests had retired and the palace had grown quiet, Prince Alexander made one last round through the corridors. He wanted to thank the staff personally for making the festival such a success. As he walked through the dimly lit hallways, he encountered various palace workers cleaning up after the day's festivities. Each time, he stopped to express his gratitude and ask if there was anything they needed. Margaret was slowly sweeping the main ballroom when the prince found her. "Mrs. Margaret, you should be resting. You've worked so hard today." She looked up at him with a radiant smile. "Your Highness, I'm not tired at all. Working in this palace has never felt so meaningful. You've reminded all of us why we're proud to serve this royal family." As Prince Alexander finally made his way to his chambers, he passed by Captain William, who was conducting the final security check of the night. "Good night, Captain William," the prince said softly. "Good night, Your Highness. Sleep well, knowing that you are protected by guards who serve not just out of duty, but out of deep respect and admiration." In his room, Prince Alexander reflected on the past few days. He had simply tried to help where he could and show kindness to those around him. He hadn't realized that his quiet gestures would create such a profound impact throughout the palace. But the truth was that his actions had changed something fundamental in Ravenshallow Palace. The rigid barriers between royalty and servants had softened into mutual respect. The guards no longer served merely because it was their job, but because they believed in the kind of leader Prince Alexander was becoming. The palace had always been beautiful, but now it was also filled with a warmth and dignity that came from everyone knowing their worth was recognized and valued. Prince Alexander had learned that the smallest acts of kindness could create the greatest changes, and the palace staff, guards, and even some of the visiting nobles had learned that true nobility wasn't about maintaining distance from others, but about finding ways to lift them up. As sleep finally came to the young prince, the entire palace rested peacefully, knowing they were all part of something special. A place where compassion and service were valued above protocol and tradition, where a future king was learning to lead with his heart as well as his mind. The quiet gestures of a 10-year-old boy had transformed not just individual lives, but the very spirit of Ravenshallow Palace itself. And in the years to come, those who served there would tell stories of the young prince who showed them that the greatest power lies not in commanding others, but in serving them with love and dignity.